today? Good, great, good to hear. Welcome to Brainwash Festival. My name is Yasmina Aboutaleb. I'm a journalist, and for the next 45 minutes, I will be talking to writer and philosopher Myisha Cherry. I will be talking to her about forgiveness, cancel culture, and radical repair, all subjects she touches upon in her new book. Her brilliant new book, I should say, Failures of Forgiveness, What We Get Wrong and How to Do Better. In her new book, she questions the way we think about forgiveness and the way we use it personally and as a society. And she also presents a new and healthier understanding of forgiveness. Myisha Cherry is joining us online. Are you there, Myisha?
I'm here.
Yes. Welcome, Myisha. Give her a big hand.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Did you have your morning coffee yet?
I didn't have enough time, but I have water.
Tea.
This is. Yeah,
I don't know. Are you
water.
a coffee or tea person?
I am coffee for sure. So coffee requires time and patience. I'm also a coffee connoisseur, so I knew I couldn't make it in 20 minutes. But I'm here. I got my H2O in me. I'm ready to go.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. It's very early for you. That's why I started about the morning coffee. Over here, it's afternoon. We're very looking forward to speaking to you. But before we dig into your book, let me introduce you properly. Because Myisha Cherry is an associate professor of philosophy at the University of California, Riverside, where she also directs the Emotion and Society Lab. She's the author of, among other, The Case of Rage, Why Anger is Essential to Anti-Racist Struggle, and Unmute, Conversations on Prejudice, Oppression, and Social Justice, which draws on her popular podcast, Unmute. But now there is a whole new book called Failures of Forgiveness. I think you just started with your book tour, right?
Just wrapping it up.
Oh, wrapping up. Okay, we're at the end of it.
Yes.
Good. And how was it?
It was jam-packed.
Yeah?
You know, when you write books, you're in isolation. And so I've been waiting for this time to talk about the ideas from the book, listening to people's perspective, people's ideas, getting questions, and people's personal stories. So it's been a joy because as a writer, this is what you wait for, to discuss the ideas, to talk one-on-one, face-to-face with folks. So I've been enjoying it. It's been wonderful.
Great. Well, that's good to hear because what also was a joy was reading your book. I really enjoyed it. I read somewhere in a review that someone said, this might be my new favorite scholar. And
Aww.
I totally agree.
To God.
I really liked it. It made me really rethink forgiveness. I wasn't even aware of my ideas about forgiveness and how we use it and what an important role it plays, but also that it has its limits. These are all things you explain to us in this book, but at the same time, it was very well researched. At the same time, it was very fun written, and I really appreciated that you also gave us a little peek in how you use it personally, what role it plays in your life. So this blended all together in a book I really enjoyed, and I can recommend it to all of you. So please take a seat, everyone who is coming in. So before we dig into the book, I thought let's maybe just start by talking about what motivated you to write this book. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so a lot of it is personal, but also politically. I usually write about things that bother me in my personal life, but also in my social life. And I was thinking about the topic of forgiveness, and here in the United States, in about 2012, I believe, there was these high profile cases of police violence among Black folks. And one of the things that I was recognizing that during the press conferences that would happen with the victims' family members, there was always reporters that will always ask this one particular question that I found unique, because this question wasn't coming up in other cases. And the question was, can you find it in your heart to forgive? And these questions kept being asked in these conferences, and it was privy because they were being recorded. We all saw it as the public. And it seems like the question was relevant, right? You kind of think about these cases were not just personal cases, but we were all kind of socially implicated because of this racial nature and its state violence nature. And so in some way, forgiveness was relevant, but I felt like the question was inappropriate. I was intrigued by why the reporters were asking the question, particularly when it wasn't being asked in other cases. I was intrigued, and I was beginning to think, what did the reporter think that forgiveness could do in this particular moment? And it began to hit me that we have a tendency to look at forgiveness as the thing that can solve all of our problems. And I was quite interested in this magical thinking. Where did we get this magical thinking? That if we just ask a victim to forgive, everything could be solved, and we needn't do anything in order to go about the work of repair. And it was also struggling in my own personal life, and we can talk about this later on in the conversation. In the instance in which me and my sister, we both believed that we had forgiven our stepfather, but our forgiveness looked different. And because I didn't want to reconcile, according to my sister, I didn't forgive. And so I was intrigued by this kind of thinking that in order to forgive, you must ride off into the sunset together. And so I think the combination of both of these personal and social stories, I want to kind of really interrogate what we thought forgiveness was, its expectations. But also I was quite interested in how that limited thinking and that magical thinking about forgiveness was getting in the way of repair and also causing more problems than I thought that it could solve.
Yes. Well, you touch upon a lot of things. Let's begin by the first thing, the media, because I'm a journalist. So
yes.
While I was reading this, I was really rethinking the way what my role is in all of this, because you start the introduction by describing a horrific event in Charleston, racial violence, and you describe how the media reported about all of this made you worry. Was worrying to you because by focusing on the forgiveness, people were not focused on how to fight this racial violence. Right? Am I right?
Right. Yeah. Right. So that case is fascinating because it is indeed a case in which reporters don't ask the question. So, right, we have Dylan Roof, who kills 9 churchgoers one evening. And during his hearing, the family members, the judge asked us if family members want to say anything to the perpetrator. And the family members, I mean, it was amazing in so many respects. The family member says that they basically said that they had forgiven Roof, right? And the media ran headlines about and tried to make sense of the forgiveness. They praised the forgiveness. And I was concerned that this narrative was being painted in ways so much that forgiveness became the story and not necessarily the racial violence that brought about the need for forgiveness. But here's the interesting part as far as your role as a journalist. I think no matter what our day job is, I think we're fascinated by stories. We're fascinated by narratives. More specifically, we are obsessed with happy endings.
Yes.
We are uncomfortable with conflict. We're uncomfortable with discomfort. And I think that desire to get a happy ending, which is not a bad goal to have, that we end up obsessing about the moral pathways that can get us there, as opposed to addressing the cause of the problem to make sure and to ensure that it never happens again.
Yes.
And that's what I'm trying to bring our attention to.
Yes, and that made me realize, because you describe how the prevalent idea of forgiveness is letting go of anger.
Right.
Like this Hollywood idea of forgiving and then moving on, and all will be fine. And this kind of frozen way of dealing with things. That was actually also my definition of forgiveness, I realized. Like you should, like letting go and then you can move on. But you also say that you can move on without forgiving. Maybe it's a bit too soon to talk about that. Let's talk about the difference between the narrow view and the broader view, because you make a distinction, right?
Right. Now, I want to say, as much as I'm going to blame you for having the narrow view, I want to say that the narrow view is not wrong. It's just limited. It's just narrow, right? So what is the narrow view? Narrow view suggests that to forgive, the thing that you do, right? The moral activity that you engage in is you let go of your anger, or you moderate your anger. And you do it with a particular goal in mind, right? And the goal that you have in mind is that you want to reconcile with the wrongdoer, right? That's why my sister's conception of my forgiveness, or her view of my forgiveness, was just incomprehensible. Because for her, if reconciliation is not the goal, then I'm not forgiving, right? And I think that's right in some cases, right? So there's some instances in which I am angry. And so what it would be to forgive would be to kind of moderate or to let go of that anger. And it may be the case in a particular situation, depending on who the wrongdoer is. The goal is for us to reconcile, right? I find that in relationship to my sister. I always want to reconcile with her because she's my sister, unless she does something egregious, which she's never done, right? So it's a worthy goal, but it's just a narrow view, because I want to say that forgiveness is not just one thing. That it could involve a variety of moral practices, depending on the wrongdoer, the nature and the relationship between you and the wrongdoer and the wrongdoing, right? So it could entail the letting go of anger, but it also could involve changing my view or changing my perspective about the wrongdoer, right? It could involve letting go of hatred, letting go of contempt. It could involve me refraining from disrespecting you, or refraining from engaging in any kind of revenge, right? And I can do it with a variety of aims. I can do it with the aim of reconciliation, or I can do it with the aim to get some kind of release for myself, right? Or some kind of relief for the wrongdoer, right? So there's or some kind of moral repair that needs to take place within myself, right? Or within the family, right? So reconciliation can be one reparative goal, but it's not the particular goal. And one of the things I want to say is that once we broaden our conception about what forgiveness is, then one of the things we're going to do is stop judging people's forgiveness as the real thing or not the real thing, right? We'll be less prone to think that forgiveness is always going to end with these headline stories, right? These kind of happy ending stories, because the reality is that once you forgive, things may never go back to the way that they once were. Right? It may be the case that you and the wrongdoer probably didn't have a relationship to begin with. So reconciliation is unfathomable, right? What's more important is that we repair our lives, right? That's the future oriented action I think that we should engage in.
In the book, you also write about you and your stepfather. Maybe people should read the book to fully get the whole story about this family affair. But what it comes down to is that you forgave your stepfather for something he did, but others perceived it not as being forgiven.
Yeah, and I think my sister really thought that because she had let go of her anger and because she had started having a conversation with him again, and I was not doing any of that, it appeared that I was still very angry 10 years after the fact. And it was very clear that I did not want to have a relationship with him. For her, I had not forgiven. Right now, I'm pretty, kind of emotionally kind of strong and mature, and I was not offended by her assessment. But her assessment did make me doubt for a moment what I had done. Right, and as a writer who is obsessed about emotions and not just what we feel, but how people interpret what we feel. I felt that that was important to kind of relate to victims, that there may be moments in which people may judge your forgiveness. And what does that do for you? Or what does that do to you, right? It can not only make you doubt what you have done, but it can make you engage in a moral activity and engage in a particular reparative aim that you're not yet ready for. And so I became concerned, not just for myself, and this is why, I decided to write this book. I became concerned about people who were in other family dynamics. They may feel pressured to forgive or do what their family members think forgiveness is. And I began to think about how that can get in the way of repair, and also create additional harms and different additional problems in the family. And so just taking my own situation and trying to put myself in the shoes of others, I felt that once people begin to understand that forgiveness is broad, it can help victims feel confident and assured about what they've done, and less prone to be, I guess you can say, the puppet of family members, even when they have good intentions.
So you say you can forgive without reconciling.
Yes.
And that is something very new to me. I don't know how it is to you, all of you, but this is something that in the narrow view always goes together. And I was thinking, how do both victims and wrongdoers play a role in this process of forgiving?
Yeah, so one of the things that I think is important is that we have a tendency to think, when it comes to this moral practice called forgiveness, that victims is the only people who participate. Right. And in some ways, I mean, I can understand that view. Right. So forgiveness, we might think that only victims have the standing to forgive. Right. Because they've been wrong. And so when it comes to forgiveness, just as a practice, it's something that victims decide to do for themselves. But one of the things I'm trying to suggest, that forgiveness as a practice, as a moral practice, involves more than just the victim withholding or extending forgiveness. Right. It involves a wrongdoer apologizing. Right. It involves the wrongdoer recommitting to never doing the wrongdoing again. Right. It involves the community. Right. Those who are perhaps not the direct wrongdoer or the direct victim. It requires the community to kind of not to rush the victim, to hold the wrongdoer accountable. Right. To do what they can to kind of do whatever their role is to usher in repair. And one of those things is not asking victims in public as a reporter if they can find it in their heart to forgive. Right. And so one of the things I'm trying to challenge people to think, that if we really want to engage in repairing our world, recovering in the aftermath of wrongdoing, whatever that may look like, it's not just going to take the victim doing it. Right. It's going to take reporters doing it. It's going to take wrongdoers doing it. It's going to take the justice systems doing it. It's going to take family members and friends doing it. And I think once we do that, we look at repair and the forgiveness as a practice, as a collaborative activity. I think we can really get the aims that we think forgiveness alone can accomplish.
Yes, and that's also very refreshing about your book, is that you actually give practical advice on how to do it, because it's easier said than done. Right. and especially at this time, our society and our world is so polarized, and on so many levels, on personal level, on a political level, and but at the same time, you just said you can withhold forgiveness, and you shouldn't be forced to forgive. You can also get to the goal without forgiving. So why do we find it such an uncomfortable idea not to forgive? And what are legit reasons not to forgive, in your opinion?
Right. This is a good question, right? So, one of the things that I suggest in the book is that, forgiveness is a way to get us towards repair, but it's not the way, right? I think that we have a variety of moral tools to make use of to restore and repair our lives. and it would suck if we just had one, right? It would be unfortunate if we just had a hammer in our toolkit, right? No, we have pliers and screwdrivers. They all do different things, but eventually they get to repairing whatever we need to be repaired. And I think that's the same thing in a moral sense. And so because forgiveness is a way to repair it, it's not the only way, then I can decide to withhold forgiveness and use another kind of moral tool to get me towards repair. Now, that's hard for a lot of people to accept. Because when you think that forgiveness is the only way towards repair, and a person decides to withhold their forgiveness, then people who find it very difficult to forgive or who decide to withhold their forgiveness, they're often accused of getting in the way, of being resistant to any kind of repair in the world, right? So they're in opposition to it. And I'm sympathetic to victims in this particular regard. So here's the reason why. I mean, I'm one of the view that forgiveness is not a duty. It's a gift. And even when I decide to engage or I decide that I want to forgive someone, it may not happen. I may not succeed. And these are not just due to factors within my control, but it can do with factors outside of my control, right? So for example, if it's the case that I want to reconcile with the wrongdoer, right? And so I'm going to use forgiveness as a way to reconcile with the wrongdoer, but the wrongdoer has yet to apologize. Right, to acknowledge any wrongdoing and basically to tell me that they would never do the wrongdoing again. But I want to reconcile with them, but I can't do it unless I have some assurance for my psychological health and for my physical safety that the wrongdoer will not continue to engage in the wrongdoing. Then no matter what my ultimate goal is, because of the wrongdoer, I can't forgive. Now that's not any fault, within myself, right? And it also may be the case that, let's just use anger as an example, that I really want to let go of this anger. But the wrongdoing was so awful that it's just very difficult for me to do. Now, I'm also of the belief, because I work on emotions, that I can't just decide to let that's not how emotions go. Right? I can try. One of the things that I do have control over is I can try to moderate my emotions. Right. But it may just be the case that I can't stop being angry. Right. And so because of those things, that there's a lot of things that are outside of our control, that I think no one should be blamed for withholding their forgiveness. Right. I also, and we can probably talk about this another time, I think that withholding forgiveness, that you can do it in a sense of power. Right. You can do it as a way to remind the wrongdoer that they got work to do. So there may be reasons to do it. Right. You may say to yourself that if I forgive at this moment, then they're going to think that they can continue to do it. Right. It's basically going to condone the wrongdoing. Right. It's going to communicate that I don't respect myself, that I don't really respect my family, et cetera, et cetera. So that there are reasons that you may want to withhold it just for a little bit. And so because of that, because I don't think that forgiveness is the only way out towards repair, that withholding it doesn't stand in the way of reparative aims. And also because I believe that withholding forgiveness, a lot of times is not necessarily up to our control, and that withholding forgiveness can achieve kind of positive outcomes in the world. I think that, hey, it's okay to withhold forgiveness for moral reasons, just like I believe that it's okay to forgive for moral reasons. All right. And I think ultimately, as long as the goal is repair, then that's fine with me.
Yes. So can you guide us what are the real do's and don'ts when asking for forgiveness?
Yeah. This is interesting. This is interesting. Okay. So we go back to those public cases that I was talking about.
Yeah.
Those are all the wrong ways. First of all, like reporters, like who are reporters, right? Okay. Let me finish my thought.
Please give us examples, because not everyone has read the book. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So, one of the things I would say is the thing that made reporters asking publicly these people that they do not know if they could forgive. Now, immediately we can easily assess that, right? We may say, well, hey, asking something so personal, so publicly just seems just not the right thing to do, right? But one may also say, because, you didn't even have a relationship with this person, so to ask them an intimate question like that, it just seems inappropriate. And so the question is, okay, what could they have done, right? in ways that I think could have ultimately got them the results, right? Or introduced kind of notions of repair. And I want to say that those journalists, those reporters, we can learn a lot from them in our day-to-day lives, right? Because I also think that whether that's, here in the United States, there's a few holidays coming up where family members get together, and we may publicly ask them for forgiveness, right? Thinking that, well, they're my family members, so I can do the public thing. So here's one of the things I want to say. I want to say that we probably perhaps should ask other questions as opposed to the forgiveness question. So let me just get straight to the point here. I don't think that victims need for you to introduce forgiveness to them in order for them to forgive, right? I think that it's possible to apologize to a victim without even asking them for forgiveness. I don't think that apologies are the same as asking or making a request for forgiveness. Because what apology is that it's an acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and it's basically making a commitment that you would never do it again. Right? Now, imagine that and I think apologies is a gift, just as forgiveness is a gift. So imagine if I came to you to give a gift to you only to ask for a gift back, right? So, hey, here's $20. Can I get $10 back? And I think that when people offer apologies and then add on, well, can you forgive me at the end? It's like asking for a gift. It's like giving a gift and then asking for a gift back, right? And so what I want to say is that you can offer up an apology, right? You can make a commitment never to do it again. You can acknowledge the wrongdoing, and you needn't ask for forgiveness. If the victim want to forgive you, they will forgive you. Here are some other things that you can ask instead, right? You can ask them, what do you want to happen, right? What do you want going forward? So many times we take a lot from victims through wrongdoing. We expect for them to do so much for us after wrongdoing. And I think it's important that we ask them, what do they want to happen, right? Another thing that we can ask instead of asking the forgiveness question is ask, what would you have me to do? Right? Or another story is, what do you want to say? Right? A lot of times, I go back to the journalist question, we want to impose our own narratives on victims and on people. And I think it's important that we need to give space for victims to speak. And I see this not just in the social sphere, but also in our interpersonal lives, right? So I think we ultimately want repair. And sometimes we get to talking and we think that unless we're talking about forgiveness, that's the only way to usher in repair. And I think that there are other things that we can ask of victims that doesn't take much from them, but allows for them to exercise agency, for them to speak on their own behalf. And I think that's a better way to get us the reparative results that we ultimately need in order to repair our world and our relationships.
Yes. Have you all been taking notes? Yeah, because I know I have, and I think it's true. I think we journalists, if I can speak on behalf of all the journalists, we do have a tendency to ask very personal questions in very fragile situations, and we tend to forget or skip the simple but very important questions like, how would you like? What would you like to happen next? And I think that's very important in analyzing how to move further for the victim, but also for society.
Right.
Yeah, and you also said you can apologize without asking for forgiveness. Well, let me save that question maybe for later, because we had a situation here with the king apologizing for Holland's involvement, historic involvement in slavery, and he also asked for forgiveness in that speech. But let's get to that later, because let's save that for the end. Let's talk about cancel culture, because another hot topic, and it's also I chose all media subjects, as you can can see, because cancel culture is some very hot topic now, not only online, and what was very interesting in your book is that you describe how you think that canceling ought to take place in the societal or commercial sphere, and not so much on the individual level. There's very much criticism in society towards cancel culture and the unforgiving nature of it, but you have some defense in favor of it, right?
I do. I mean, I would say this, that I make a distinction between canceling, what we call canceling, and cancel culture, right? And so let me just say off the bat, for those who are already suspicious of what they think my view is going to be, that I don't think any particular practice should be a culture, right? Particularly a kind of moral practice, right? And so I don't think canceling should be a culture, just as I don't think that forgiveness should be a culture. And what do I mean by that? When something is a culture, it means that it particularly when moral concepts become a culture, that we typically will engage in them all the time, or we will have expectations that someone ought to do it all the time. That we usually think that we ought to do it because everybody else is doing it. I mean, that's what culture is, right? And I want to say that I don't want people forgiven because everybody else forgives, right? So I'm against forgiveness culture, just as I'm against canceling as a culture, right? You cancel people because, that's just what you do. Or you cancel people because everybody else is doing it. So I don't think any moral activity should be a culture within itself. However, I do believe in these moral concepts, right? And I defend them. And so I do think forgiveness is something that we should do when there's times and moments in which we shouldn't do it. And I would say that's the same thing with canceling, or what we have a tendency to think canceling is. So I basically take canceling to be, and I look at kind of its roots in pop culture, because it comes out of pop culture. So the notion of basically canceling is a transactional term. And people can go in more detail. If you read the book, you'll go into a little bit more detail about where it comes from transactionally. But it was intended to really point to putting an end to transactional relationships, or something that one takes to be transactional, right? So we know what transactional relationships are, right? So we're only in relationship because you do something for me and I do something for you, and that's our transactional relationship. And when I no longer want to get something from you, I quote unquote cancel that particular relationship. Now, when it comes to online stuff, this becomes quite relevant when we talk about celebrities, right? And as much as we would like to think that we actually have a true, sincere, real relationship with celebrities, we do not. And I have to tell myself that all the time, because I'm a huge fan of basketball player LeBron James and Formula One racing driver Lewis Hamilton. In so many ways, I think that I'm in a relationship with them, that they're my best friends. But no, it's a transactional relationship, right? I watch shows, I buy their products, and they give me entertainment and they win. I mean, that's the extent of the relationship. Of course, we're human beings, so we have a moral relationship, but it's basically a transactional relationship. And at any moment, I can cancel that transactional relationship. Right? Mercedes hasn't been winning in Formula One. So I can understand how people would say, well, I'm no longer a fan of the team, right? You withdraw your support. That's perfectly fine. There's nothing morally wrong with that, right? And so online, there seems to be kind of reasons for people who want to withdraw their report. That has to do with moral matters, right? So we know there's been a lot of stuff. I don't know how much in the Netherlands this may be the case, but let's just say messy, immoral behavior for celebrities. And you can see that, hey, the person probably is winning, but they're doing illegal and immoral acts. And that may give reasons for people to withdraw their support. And that would be canceling, right? Then there's nothing wrong with that, right? Because of the nature of the particular relationship. And this goes back to kind of what I was saying just a while ago. What gets problematic is when it becomes a culture, And only you know if you're participating in the culture. And you know you're participating in the culture when you do it without thinking. You do it without any evidence. You do it because everybody else is doing it. But that's just the case, or problematic when it comes to canceling. It's problematic even when we think about positive emotions or positive attitudes. So because of that, I don't think that canceling, as I've defined it, is incompatible with forgiveness. Just like I don't think refusing to reconcile with the wrongdoer is incompatible with forgiveness. So it could be an instance in which I decide to cancel a celebrity, which basically means that I no longer want to engage in a transactional relationship with the celebrity. And I could still yet forgive the celebrity, right? I could still extend mercy towards the celebrity. And what I think is important here, and what I think I hope people get from that chapter, is that canceling, as I define it, can be compatible with forgiveness and mercy. You don't have to choose between the two. However, I don't like canceling, or the language of canceling, when it comes to interpersonal relationships, right? Which are relationships that are not transactional. They are intimate. They are moral. If anything, they're reciprocal, but that's based on the moral relationship and sincere relationship that we have. And so I don't like the language, because anytime we use the language of canceling in our interpersonal relationship, we're treating the relationship like it's transactional when we shouldn't, right? That's not the nature of the relationship. And by doing that, we objectifying the person that we're in relationship with. And so I basically suggest, don't say you're canceling another human being that you're in a relationship with. Just say, hey, I no longer forgive you, or I'm withholding forgiveness from you. So yeah, that's my view on canceling.
Yes. I was wondering, because there are a lot of celebrities in Holland canceled.
Okay.
Especially TV
and
hosts.
Truly canceled?
We have a few TV hosts here in the Netherlands. I think it takes too far to explain who, what, and how. Okay. But the ritual in this canceling seems to be, so the person is canceled. In this case, a TV host for bullying and for creating a culture of fear among staff at work. The TV show was on air for about a decade, more, I think, a decade and a half. And so the person is now canceled. The show is off the air. It was already off the air, but his new show is also off the air. And this person apologized in the newspaper. Okay. And so everyone is talking about, should he or should he not get back on television because he apologized. So there's a lot of discussion. Was the apology sincere? What should we do about it? So what do you think we should do about this case? Because
right. So
I know you don't know the guy and you haven't read the apology.
No, I can still make a judgment.
But there seems to be, in your book, you describe a way of the right way to apologize for a celebrity. Can you describe what are the ingredients?
Yeah, so I would say this. One of the things about what happens when a term goes pop, that we tend to use that term to kind of replace other important, distinct moral terms that I think would be more kind of accurate and help us explain what's really happening, right? Here in the United States, the right has basically used canceling as like a pejorative.
Yeah, also sense. Here.
Yeah. And so it no longer becomes like a way to hold people accountable. It becomes like this political term, which we know is what happens when that happens. So I think, let's get precise here, all right? Because I think this is going to help us. You have someone in the workplace being inappropriate in the workplace and given their sense of power, abusing their power and also abusing others. Okay. Now we know the workplace, there's rules. There's a culture and ways in which that has expectations for each particular individual. You don't have to work where you work. There's options in the marketplace. But also employers have they are accountable to the public and they're accountable to the people in which they employ. And so when people are disrespectful, when people engage in wrongdoing in the workplace, the employer has certain kinds of responsibilities. So firing is a thing. It's been a thing forever. And people fire for a variety of reasons. And it seems in this particular case, the person was being inappropriate and the person was fired. I don't see what's new about that, right? Or what's morally apparent about that. Okay, so let me continue here. Life would be so great if all we had to do was apologize and everything would go back to the way that it was. But that's not the way that it is, right? That when we engage in wrongdoing, our apology can only do so much, right? And this is one of the things, as much as the book, I want to speak to victims, but I also want to speak to wrongdoers. There's an afterlife to wrongdoing, right? That as much as we may be sorry for what we've done, sometimes we have to deal with the aftermath of that. And the aftermath of that doesn't go away because we've had a change of heart. People being hurt, people's lives being in ruin doesn't immediately mend when we acknowledge that we've done wrong, right? And as human beings, particularly as adults, you would think that we've learned this as children, like what accountability is, like being accountable to our particular actions. But it seems just in the public sphere recently, and I want to be kind here, that sometimes within the moral sphere, particularly when we are wrongdoers, we can get very infantile when it comes to accountability. And I just want to remind us, just like our parents used to remind us, that there are consequences to our actions. And I think that if you're going to apologize for what you've done, and this goes back to what I was talking about with the political leaders, please know that please know that your apology is not going to create a new world. I wish that it will. It had that power, but it doesn't, right? I think what we need to recognize that when we apologize, that we are acknowledging wrongdoing, right? We're saying to the person who's been harmed that you were not wrong in feeling the way that you felt. Your conception or perception of events is not mistaken. So I want to confirm that everything that you felt and everything that you experienced was right. I acknowledge wrongdoing. Through an apology, you basically say that, I'm sorry, given my new perspective on things. I wish I could have done differently, but I did wrong. And going forward in the future, I'm going to make a commitment to not to repeat that particular wrongdoing. That's what apology is. And particularly if one has the power to engage in any kind of reparative acts, right? Whether that's making things right, if you can make them right, whether that's through finances, whether that's through actions, then you engage in that reparative acts. To me, those three ingredients right there creates a sincere apology, right? Now, here's also a thing that we probably need to add 4 more things. And this is like a side note to the person making the apology. Do not expect anything, right? I think those who apologize have no expectations, right? Because that's where the kind of control goes back into, now we're going to use the apology to coerce the victim to do what we want them to do. Or we use the apology to kind of obscure what we've done. Right. And what I mean by that is to simply suggest, I know I did that. I know I created a culture of fear, but I apologize. Right. So we can use even this wonderful thing, this moral way to kind of repair our world. We can use it in ways that can pressure people, that can make people feel guilty, that can be very manipulative, that can obscure wrongdoing. But one of these we need to be reminded is that the purpose of apology is to do those 3 things that I just suggested. Right? Nothing else. And you can always tell when apology is quote unquote insincere, or a person really doesn't mean what they've said when they have those particular expectations, all right? When they aim to use it to obscure wrongdoing or to make the victim do a particular thing, right? But we need to recognize is that apologies, just like forgiveness, is not magical. That apologies also have their limits, right? That apologies, it's not within themselves is going to therefore make the victim, have open arms towards you, unfortunately. It may create that, but we ought not to have that expectation. That apologies only serve to validate wrongdoing, to make a commitment that you'll never do it again, and to kind of allow, therefore, some kind of reparative action. That's beautiful within itself. And we need to leave it as that.
Yeah. Well, time goes quickly, so I want to move to the last question before we go to the audience, because I promised we would talk about the Dutch king,
Yes.
Willem-Alexander. So this year he apologized and asked for forgiveness, like I said, for the Dutch historic involvement in slavery. The former prime minister did it last year. And so on the one hand, they said there are going to be no reparations. There will be funds for raising awareness. Yeah, I can see what you think. So funds. What else? A national slavery museum. Yeah. I think that are the main things. And at the same time, we are still struggling systemic racism in Holland. Even the prime minister finally agreed on that. So as always, there are proponents and critics of apologizing for the historic involvement in slavery, because lots of people say, well, I'm not responsible, I wasn't there, etc., etc. And people think it's cheap gesture politics. Mm-hmm. So what do you think of the value of these kind of excuses, like our king gave, and what is the right thing to do here?
Yeah. So I want to say a little, because there's so much to say. So many people have written on this. So I'm just going to try to give my little contribution here. I want to say that going about repair, whatever way we decide to do it, is never an empty gesture unless we make it an empty gesture. Right. And I can understand people's kind of opinion about that because they've seen people use it as an empty gesture. But it needn't be that way. Now, it's interesting because these are state leaders who are making the apology. And so whoever's made the statement that, hey, I wasn't there, you're right. That's why we're not asking you to make the apology. But state leaders can make apologies given their position, right? As a state leader, right, you represent the nation, and not just the nation in the present, but also the nation in the past. And so as a representative, it's proper for this person to ask for or to make it a particular apology. Now, it's interesting here because in my previous answer, I talk about kind of a commitment to engage in kind of reparative acts.
Yes.
Right. So you can imagine if I stole $5 from you and I apologize and then I leave thinking that the apology is going to heal our relationship without giving that $5 back, you will basically doubt my apology. Right. And so we have a tendency, even in my example that I just mentioned, to think that repair is only money. And people, I don't know about how you all are in Holland, but in the United States, we feel uncomfortable about people getting money. That's not us. So right now we're going through kind of a student loan kind of crisis. We have to pay for education here, and people can get in debt as a result. And you would think that if the president wants to forgive student loans, that people will be okay with it, but there's disagreement about that. So when it comes to money, we disagree about who can get money, who cannot. But here's the interesting thing. I think that the funds that are being used for a museum or a memorial, I think that's important. All right. I think memory, and we've learned from Germany, memory is important, right? But also, if there's an afterlife, I talked about this, there's an afterlife to wrongdoing. And particularly when it comes to racism is not going to go away because a state representative apologized. And there's continual systemic injustice. Then the money should not just be set up for memory as if there's no current life of injustice and racism. So the question I would even suggest is that, or the recommendation is, can that money also be used to kind of address the systemic and the racial injustice that is currently happening? Because here's the interesting thing. It's easy to apologize on behalf of Holland for the past, but it's another thing to take responsibility for what's currently happening in the present. right? And so I would just challenge, memory museum is important. Apologies are also important, but also addressing, do not allow that to obscure the present day wrongdoing. And how are you going to address and put an end to the present day wrongdoing? I mean, this goes back to the whole emphasis of my book is how do we go about radical repair? We can do it superficially, right? In which we simply just offer empty gesture to make the appearance that we are engaged in the work of repair. But I challenge people to engage in what I call radical repair. And one element of radical repair is you get at the root of the issue, right? And if you're not addressing the root of problems, particularly social problems, systemic injustice, racism, et cetera, if you're not addressing the root of the problem, then you're never going to really repair the nation, the world, the state. And so I would challenge to use those funds to also to address present day problems and also to acknowledge that slavery has an afterlife, oppression, injustice has an afterlife that is currently happening in the present. And we need to reconcile with how we have contribute and benefited from the past in the present. And that's the tough part. That's the tough part. And until we do that, then anything outside of that is indeed empty gesture.
Yes. Yes, and you talk about the radical repair in the last chapter, but unfortunately we don't have any more time left to dig deeper into that. But what's clear is that the king and the prime minister should read this book. Yes. As should all of you. Yeah, we're at the end of the program. Do we have time for a question from the audience? I'm looking at. Okay, we have a very tight schedule. I'm so sorry. So thank you so much
thank you all for
the demystification of forgiveness. And anyone who wants to know more about it, please read this book, Failures of Forgiveness, What We Get Wrong and How to Do Better. Thank you so much, Myisha Cherry, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Give her a big hand.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh, dat was het.